Just a few words to wish Happy Father's Day to all you dads, grandfathers, godfathers, and of course, our spiritual fathers, our priests, the fathers of the wider church, the wider family. However, today we most especially take time to celebrate, honor, and reflect on our own fathers who are priests in their own right. Yes, priests. Priests of the family home, the domestic church. And just as Jesus calls men to the vocation of the priesthood to serve the church, he also calls men to the vocation of marriage and family life. A husband and a father called to serve and exercise his priestly ministry within his family. As priests and fathers of the home, with that call to serve, we have a responsibility to live a life that proclaims the gospel values in all we say and do. And it is important to realize that as Christian parents, grandparents, and godparents, we are the primary educators of our children in the Catholic faith. We are the ones to set the example of practicing the faith by regular participation in the sacramental life of the church. We are the ones who are given the gift of faith at our baptism. And we are the ones who have the responsibility to pass on that precious gift given to us by our Father in heaven. Many of you are aware of the fact that Pope Francis has called a special year a year of Jubilee, which has its roots in the Old Testament, that every 50 years there would be a year of reparation. This year he declared as a year of mercy, and in recent times we haven't had them every 50 years. It's been more frequent than that. The year of mercy is a time when, especially at St. Peter's Basilica, you can pass through the holy door that's normally bricked up other times, other years, and gain special graces and indulgences if you make a pilgrimage there. And I also say that throughout the world, there are churches, like in this archdiocese, you can go to the cathedral and do the same, make a pilgrimage to the cathedral, or other churches delegated within the archdiocese. There is another special year that he proclaimed, or that really is the anniversary of the reinstatement of the permanent diaconate. It was 50 years ago at Vatican II that the church decided to begin ordaining men to holy orders in the diaconate that had been not done for 1,500 years. So it was an anniversary. And the Pope invited all the deacons in the world to come to Rome and celebrate with him a weekend of joy. And so we decided, Karen and I, our good friends, Deacon Sam Basta and his wife, Lynette, to go on a pilgrimage to Rome. And I have to say, it made it extra special to being with such good friends going on this pilgrimage. But as you might know, pilgrimages are not always easy. They actually are not meant to be. Changed flights, changes in hotel accommodations, long waiting lines, it goes on and on and on. It is not all about pizza, pasta, and gelato. But we did do some of that. But most especially, we had many close and inspiring moments that we felt the love of God in our midst. So I feel a responsibility to share our experience with you. You see, because pilgrimages are not just for the persons or people who make them. They are for all of you who were in our prayers. So after some flight delays, we arrived in Rome about Friday at noon. And we were scheduled to have our first session at 4 o'clock. So there was some scurrying that had to go on to get our badges, get assigned to the different churches to be at our first session at 4 p.m. that afternoon. And the way it worked is that there were 4 churches that the deacons who came to Rome were assigned to, all by different languages. And we were assigned to a church called St. John the Baptist just outside of St. Peter's Square. And we attended that first session, and we heard three of our own, 3 deacons, talking to us about our ministry as deacons, sort of a self-examination of conscience and how we're doing. And it was about what we are to do in terms of our diaconate in church life, in family life, and in the workplace, and in every place we go in our daily lives. Then on Saturday, it was time for all of us English-speaking deacons to gather at 10 o'clock in the morning outside of St. Peter's Square for our pilgrimage through the Holy Door. And the way that worked is we were broken up into groups, but at the front of each group was someone carrying a cross. And I was designated to carry the cross forward as we processed into St. Peter's Square for our group. And of course, we changed it off with each other. And as it's probably, I would say, 3/4 of a mile walk from outside of St. Peter's Square to the Holy Door. And as we walked, we stopped along the way about halfway, and there was a deacon there reminding us about the Church to Our Lady that was on our right side, saying, this is the time you pause for a few moments and remember to pray for the people that you promised you were going to pray for. That's when I prayed for you and all the people of this parish and the people of the Archdiocese of Seattle. As we went forward, we went through that Holy Door in a procession, and then afterwards we were able to go to confession to our designated churches, and they were having confessions there 24/7 throughout that weekend, and most especially there's confessions all around Rome during this Holy Year of Mercy. And we had another 4 p.m. session with a cardinal, Cardinal Pell, who's from Australia, and he's the head of the finances of the Vatican, a daunting task in itself. But he talked about the diaconate and how it fit in to holy orders. The bishop, the deacon who's the eyes and ears of the bishop, and the priest, all in collaboration for salvation. But he also, at the end, left some time for the deacons to ask questions. And as you might imagine, one of the first questions was, what is the church thinking about? What are we hearing about the fact that women might become members of the diaconate? His answer to that, well, there's always been women who are deacons. The question will be if the church decides whether they would be ordained to holy orders. And another question that's always on the minds of priests and deacons is about the fact that deacons do not anoint the sick. And one deacon raised his hand and said, well, I know that it's about the part of the rite has the part where you forgive sins, but don't you think if we can forgive sins in the sacrament of baptism, we'd be able to do that in the sacrament of the sick? And the cardinal said, there will never be, there will never be a deacon who will celebrate the sacrament of the sick. So there you have it. So the Sunday then was time for Mass with the Pope. And we were told to arrive at 7:45 in the morning, thinking we have these special badges and we're going to get by the Swiss Guard right away. We arrived there, Sam and I and Lynette and Karen. But there was already 2,000 deacons lined up to get in, go through security. So we were experiencing those long lines. And after waiting and going through security, it probably was 9:30 by the time that we got to the place where we were to vest. And so it was very, very hectic for Sam and I because we were one of the last few to get in. The good part about that was Karen and Lynette were there early enough that they got almost front row seats in the square there to celebrate Mass. And it was at that time that we were presented with this special stole that has the emblem of the Year of Mercy on it, which you see all over Rome these days. And in Latin it says, "Be merciful just as your heavenly Father is merciful." And so that is something that I will cherish for many, many years. Then we were told to line up, process in to the St. Peter's Square, lined up 4 by 4, 4 of us abreast all the way, 2,000 deacons. So you can imagine the procession. And again, a special moment being there with my good friend Sam, the two of us processing in together. And as we processed in, just ready to turn and go up the steps to the altar, we turned to our right, and there were smiling Karen and Lynette. And of course, it evoked great smiles and some emotion from the two of us. The special moment when it really hit me is we got to the top of the steps and we reverenced the altar. And it was that moment that I realized I was not just there to be a participant in the Mass. I was there to assist the Holy Father as a deacon. We ended up being seated in the front row, or 4th row, pretty good view of the altar as Holy Father celebrated Mass. But it was that time it hit me as I sat down and I looked at the tremendous facade of all the different great saints, St. Peter's, looking at the crucifix up above the Holy Father's chair, and looking around and seeing the throngs of people gathered in St. Peter's Square. I said, what the heck am I doing here? I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be doing that. It was a special blessing. And I have to say, the outdoor liturgy was beautiful. The music was beautiful. The sound system was crisp and clear. And it had just enough of the old, enough of the Latin, enough of the new. And the Holy Father's homily was especially challenging. And although he was addressing the deacons, he also at times addressed the throng there in St. Peter's Square. And I think he was talking to all of us. So I'm going to read you a couple excerpts from his homily. He says, if evangelizing is the mission entrusted at baptism to each Christian, serving is the way that mission is carried out. How do we become good servants? As a first step, we must be available. A servant daily learns detachment from doing everything his own way. The day will not be his own, but given over to others. He or she knows that his time is not his own, but a gift from God, which is then offered back to him. And we're reminded of the same thing in today's gospel, when Jesus says, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. A servant of the servant. And at the end of the Mass, of course, the Pope went down in St. Peter's Square on the Pope-mobile greeting people, and it was quite a sight to see that. And afterwards, greeting Karen was again another emotional moment because I was filled with wonder and awe and was thankful for being there. Then on Monday, we took a tour of the Scavi, which is a dig underneath St. Peter's Basilica where the tomb of St. Peter is, and learned that he is buried in a burial ground of other Christians there. And sometime in the 4th century, they bulldozed, if you will, a hill down and covered up this Christian burial ground, and that's where Constantine built the first basilica to St. Peter. So they've done a nice job of making that visit to the tomb of St. Peter an underground museum. And then something that I always wanted to do, the last thing I'll tell you about, is I was able to visit the tomb of St. Lawrence. St. Lawrence, deacon and martyr, and of course my patron saint. And we went to that church, which was also another church that you could enter the holy door. And I spent some time in front of that tomb, and he's not buried. He's right there in an enclosure in the church behind the altar. Spent some time there praying for myself, my ministry, and for all the deacons of the world. But it was a special moment. And if you know the story of St. Lawrence, he was barbecued on a grate, and all of the statues and icons have him holding a grate. I'm proud to be a deacon. I hope I don't meet that kind of a death. So in conclusion, there were still a few delayed flights coming home and that sort of thing, but it's good to be home. And I hope that what I've told you about my experience, our experience, that you might want to make a local pilgrimage or even to Rome during this holy year of mercy.